is Jason J. Rock Houston, and you're listening to Chaotic Risk Magazine, and we can be found on the web at www.chaoticrisk.com. Once again, we're speaking to my good friend Gar Borras, and today we'll speak with Gar about Grand Funk's live album from 1970. It came out November 16th, 1970. And good afternoon to you, Gar, and welcome back. So talk a little bit about Grand Funk and the band and the live album, how they both came on your radar back in the day.
I was a kid, and of course, music and all of that exposing myself to rock music, because it just seemed that, the bands that used to, rock back in those days were, them and Black Sabbath and Cream and all of that stuff. And my first exposure to Grand Funk was, it's so long ago, I don't even remember how I got the album, but it was the live album.
Yeah, now let me ask you, did you hear it? Was it after you got the album, somebody hearing a song on the radio? I mean, did you remember what was the first Grand Funk song you were ever exposed to?
It really wasn't, because they weren't really getting a whole lot of radio airplay at that time. Their music was kind of considered garage band rock, even though they were selling out stadiums, and they really weren't getting much exposure as far as like how your traditional bands did it, where people would discover bands on the radio, and they just, at that time in the early 70s, they just weren't churning out like these hits, that kind of stuff. People were more gravitating towards their live show, because their live show just had a lot of energy, and they just seemed to rock, and they were selling out very large, they were doing arena rock.
And they were one of the few powerhouse trios back then, three-piece bands. You had Grand Funk, you had like Cream, you had the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and that's another thing that made Grand Funk Railroad so unique.
Yeah, it takes very high-level musicianship for only three people to be in a band and to put out music that can sound so full.
Oh, yeah. And I'll tell you another interesting thing about this album. When I heard we were going to be discussing, I went on YouTube and I was looking at some of the tracks that were on this album. Much to my surprise, I expected to hear at least... like We're an American Band, but that was for a lot of those hits were even released. If you check out this album again, it comes out in 1970, and it doesn't even have like We're an American Band on it. It has a lot of the early kind of deeper cuts. So if you want to kind of expose yourself to some of the lesser known tunes, this is a good way to do that.
Yeah, because We're an American Band didn't come out till I think somewhere around 5 years later.
Yeah. And from what
this is 5 years before they started getting some major radio airplay.
Yeah. And from what I understand, interestingly enough, this album, Grand Funk itself, kind of like if you listen to a song like Bad Time, it kind of has an R&B feel. And interestingly enough, I was reading on the Wikipedia of it, this album actually crossed over onto the R&B album chart all the way to number 29.
Well, I was just gravitating towards them because, as a kid, I just really liked stuff that rocked. And for that time period, when you compare music from that time period to now, because everything is so much more sophisticated and everything, people look at things and it can be out of context, because you're listening to music that was recorded like almost a half a century ago.
Plus, the equipment it was recorded on, it's nowhere near the technology of today, so it's kind of dinosaur recording equipment. But it is. But when you look at it as a kid, back in the early 1970s, this stuff really rocked, and I really enjoyed it. And I
I remember as a kid, my parents had a house in West Covina, and I would put the headphones on and play the record and just blast my ears out. And it's just music to me as a kid at that time was a magnet. I was just attracted. I was like I was a piece of metal, and music was a magnet.
Yeah, and to me, what's interesting is you must have had your ear on the pulse of music at that time, because I was reading on the Wikipedia, interesting enough, about this live album. Back in the day, it was one of those albums where, and it didn't really say why, just the critics panned it, the critics hated it, but it was so loved and adored by the fan base.
Yeah, and that's kind of alluding to what I was saying before, because they were not getting much support, but yet they were still selling out very large venues and arenas and things like that, which is very unusual, because usually when a band has that kind of success, they're also having success because of the record, because back in those days, a band was touring to support the record.
Yeah.
It was a very different formula that was working for Grand Funk, and they were really good musicians. But it's just it's really as simple as during that time they just rocked.
Yeah, and very much like Kiss a few years later, like if you listen to those first 3 Kiss albums, they're a lot more raw and polished as compared to, say, by the time they got to Destroy, where they had started having a lot of radio hits and stuff. But like when after those first 3 albums, they were like, there's something going on with Kiss, because people are coming to see the show live, but those first 3 albums, they're not selling for some reason. So they got the bright idea, why don't we go and record a live album? And once that live album came out, people started just going to see Kiss. I mean, because people were realizing there's something going on with this band live that they haven't been able to capture in the studio.
Yep, and as years went on, that type of formula, if you were having those kind of difficulties with your album not really selling and things like that, say back in the 80s, if you were trying to do the same thing, and you weren't selling initially when the first album came out, you were dropped.
Yeah, and back in the 70s too, they not only that, but they almost had a formula for, like, okay, by the time you get ready to release your fifth album, maybe be a live album, just to kind of, like you said, see where we are with the fans, Yeah,
well, some albums were putting out the live album just to fulfill contractual obligations, because they toured so much, and they were, just kind of, didn't really have, new music, so they would put out the live album just to kind of give themselves a buffer before they put out another album.
And kind of interesting with this Grand Funk live album, interestingly enough, it's not really included on the official discography. When I went on the Wikipedia the other day to research for an interview today, I had to type in Grand Funk live album, and then a separate Wikipedia came up for it. And then I also seen on the discography, they also, I guess, released a live album in 1981. It's called Grand Funk Lives. I guess that has some of the later day hits, but I guess this album has been reissued quite a few times, and maybe that's the reason for that, but it's hard to find, I guess, these days, but you can still get it.
That's trippy, because I didn't know that. I just remember as a kid,
you remember the impact it had.
I just loved listening to it, because you just pick up on the energy.
Mm-hmm. And that's so true on an album like this, because again, like I said, people that have never heard the album would think, okay, we're gonna go get this Grand Funk live and check it out. We're gonna hear we're an American band, like you said. This came out very early in the band's career, before they had all those hits, and so you're getting to hear some of the dark, deeper cuts, if you will. Like a great track that I just loved off of this was Heartbreaker, Inside Looking Out, Mean Mistreater. Those are the songs that maybe kind of get overlooked generally, but you get an album like this, and they're kind of highlighted, and people pay a little more attention to it.
Yeah, I remember as a kid when you opened, because it was a double album.
When you
opened it up and you looked inside, and there was pictures of them playing live. And as a kid, you would see their big amplifiers. Well, I mean, by today's standards, it's nothing, because like in the 80s it became giant walls of speakers and amplifiers. But back in those days, in the early 70s, it looked like it was they were big amplifiers, and they were all, standing up as tall as the guys in the bands. And these are brands that I don't even remember, the brands of amplifiers or anything. But, then again, as a kid and as a musician, you're also becoming enamored and checking out their equipment and all that stuff. Ooh, I want a big amp like that.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And, this album I was reading, it was actually recorded live, of course, between June 23rd and 25th, 1970, and I believe it was recorded in Florida. And interestingly enough, you would think the album cover, you'd think they would take, that's a shot they took maybe from that live performance. Oddly enough, it's a shot from from a previous live performance, having nothing to do when it was actually recorded. I guess maybe just going for the best shot. Who knows?
No, I'm sure they were. I mean, of course they're going to put the best shot, and that shot does kind of capture what they were all about.
Live.
I mean, it captures them just rocking out.
Yeah, and very much like live albums back in the day, like you were saying, this was a double gatefold album. It was just a special way of packaging albums back then. So what you ended up getting, you'd get like two-sided records where you have side 1, side 2, side 3, side 4. And then I was reading later when eventually you release it on CD, they released it in two versions. You at one time or another you could get like 2 CD sets, and they released it later on just as a single disc. So that's another thing they had working in their favor, the marketing and the technology and stuff that would come along later.
It was also one of those early albums where they had all of the lyrics to the songs on the inside of the album. So as you're listening to the songs and everything, you can be reading the lyrics. So you kind of have an understanding of what they're saying. Because sometimes when people sing songs, it's hard to make out what they're saying.
Yeah, a great example of that is Steven Tyler. I mean, if you listen to some of his non-cynical lyrics, like what did he say? But
exactly. But you could listen to the stuff and read the lyrics along. And I remember it just being glued to the album and reading everything as I'm listening to the whole thing. And it was very. I mean, you have to understand. I think I was maybe either say like middle school, 8th grade, because back in those days they used to call it junior high school. Nowadays they call it middle school. I think I was middle school, 8th grade when this was all going on, or maybe even younger. I might have been like 7th grade or something like that. I don't, it's so long ago. You got to figure how young is a guy, in middle school. That's really young to be exposed to music and just be really enamored and attracted to it.
Yeah, and the Grand Funk band as a whole, it had an interesting image because you had Mark Forner, good-looking frontman, and then you had like Don Brewer, the drummer, who just his air was so Afro-like. People thought he was black. I mean, they just had an amazing sound. They had an amazing look. Everything that seemed to kind of all fit together. The look, the sound. And then what's kind of amazing is, to me, Grand Funk is one of those bands. This is a band that eventually, for many people, these songs like we've been talking about become the soundtrack to our lives. And, you could name any number of songs. And what's the amazing thing is Grand Funk, they've been back together now probably 20, 25 years, and they really haven't released any new music. But what the material they've got. That's my point. It's really stood the test of time. These songs, and that to my belief, that's what makes a really great band. If you know you have songs that are almost 40 years old and people are still loving them, that's just you guys have delivered.
Well, when I listed it on my Facebook page, there were people that were making comments, about how one of the greatest underrated bands of all time.
They really are. I mean, they're also one of those bands that now, unless you were around like your age or my age, there are people that maybe don't know the name Grand Funk Railroad. They've heard the songs. You tell them, "Oh, we're an American band." Walk Like a Man, some kind of wonderful. Oh yeah, I heard those songs. Oh I know those songs, but they're not as. So it's one of those bands, like you said, that as much as there's a lot of love for them, they've been somewhat forgotten also.
Yeah, well, that happens after time.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about what started our conversations between you and I, Jason, was when I was on Facebook and somebody that was on my friends list elected me to list the 20 influential albums. Yeah. One album a day, with no comments, to put the album out there, and I didn't do it as a popularity contest for the albums or anything. I did it because these albums, they stood out to me, because, and if you notice, all of the stuff that I list was stuff that I was kind of introduced to when I was really, really young and starting to decide that I really wanted to get into music, and I really wanted to. I was just attracted to it like a magnet, which later on fueled my desire to learn how to play music and stuff. Because at the time when I was listening to Grand Funk, I was just kind of dabbling in it, and just
getting
back
exposed.
in those days, there really wasn't much exposure to learning how to play music. There wasn't a whole lot of music stores that had teachers. There wasn't this whole thing. You just, and then plus my parents were really very unsupportive in me becoming a musician, so they never really supported it and tried to help out in getting me lessons. So I had to reach out and grab onto anything that I could get my grubby little hands on to try to get a foothold in playing music, because the desire was so strong. Nothing was going to stop me. If there was something that I could grasp onto, I was going to take it. And luckily for me, what happened, and this is around this time, my uncle, my cousins that are my most closest and dearest cousins, my uncle was stationed in Ecuador, and he was being stationed back here in the United States, and he was he got a house. My parents lived in West Covina, and my uncle wound up getting a house with my cousins in Covina. Wow. And there was my cousins, as they were looking for a house, two of my cousins, one of the boy cousins roomed with me, and one of the girl cousins roomed with my sister, as the parents were looking for a house for their family, and my cousin just barely knew anything about playing guitar, and I squeezed every piece of information. I mean, he barely knew how to play, and I squeezed every piece of information that I could get out of him to be able to try to get some kind of a foothold. He taught me how to tune a guitar, and he taught me a couple of things about, not chords, but just, how to play one note melodies moving, around on the fretboard, and that was just kind of enough to get the ball rolling. But I truly actually owe my entire being where I am right now to that cousin.
Wow.
Because had he not provided me with that information, that really wasn't that much, but it was just enough to grasp onto to get the ball rolling. Had he not done that, I would not. I just can't see myself being here. It was a critical time for me, and I totally and truly, from the bottom of my heart, owe myself being where I am, doing what I'm doing today, to my cousin Frank Borras.
Well, thank you, Frank, for all the early training there. But Grand Funk too. Another thing about the band that always kind of that I took notice of was we were talking about like great live TV concerts and things they used to have back in the days, like Don Kirshner's rock concert. Do you yourself, Gar, ever remember seeing Grand Funk do any live performances on TV or anything back in the day?
No, I don't. It's unfortunately that I don't think they really. Then again, I just don't think they were getting that kind of support. They were just kind of making success in spite of.
Yeah, really.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what the point I was making with them having an image problem kind of early in the interview when we were talking, because as successful as they eventually became, eventually they did get to the point where even today, you're hearing the stuff on the radio, 40 years later, they never got to the point where they were on they were never even on the cover like Rolling Stone magazine. If you think about how popular they eventually got, that just kind of boggles the mind. But they were successful in spite of it, because they weren't real working class bands like you're talking about. They success eventually came their way, but not because anybody handed it to them, because they worked for it.
Yes, and they put a lot into their music, and I think that's what people were picking up from their live performances was the energy they were putting into their songs, and they were just having fun with their songs. They weren't back in this time, they weren't trying to churn out a major hit.
Just if you got one, you got one, kind of, Yeah.
They were just, their major hit was their live performance and that energy that was coming out of their songs.
Yeah, at this point, but I'll tell you another song I'm sure everybody has heard of, and people may be surprised to learn it's not even an original tune. I forget who originally did it, but that song, The Locomotion, which it got to a point where
that was actually a Motown song.
Yeah, and see, that's why they had that R&B crossover with songs like that and Bad Time. Locomotion, though, was an interesting tune in that for a rock band like this, it had such a great live sound to kind of do like what's almost considered a dance track. It eventually got to a point where it was being played all over, in the clubs and stuff, and people were dancing and getting down to it. And even still today, a lot of people think, because you said originally it's an R&B Motown song, and it eventually, I think, crossed over to like R&B radio stations, which is kind of interesting for a rock band of that nature to be able to do.
Yes. But most of their original material that became successful was actually written by their drummer, Brewer.
Yeah. Which
and kind of a la Neil Peart for Rush.
Yeah.
So Brewer really had a big hand in their success, because We're an American Band was written by him, and that was their biggest success as far as what was written by the band.
Yeah, even when you go see Grand Funk today, I mean, that's a battle cry, but that's a big encore that people come back for, because that's what they want to hear. And another.
Well, you still hear that song popping up every day. I wouldn't be surprised to hear we're an American band in a commercial.
Oh, yeah, and it's been played in commercials and movies. Like I think even like that one Tom Cruise did the 4th of July. I think it was featured in commercials. Every 4th of July, you hear it on TV, on the radio. So it's one of those tunes that that everybody just gets behind.
Yes. So yeah, they were kind of one of those bands that was a magnet to me when I was a very young kid. That in really giving me that drive. I want to be doing. I want to learn how to do that.
Yeah. And Don Brewer, like you said, for a drummer, he really was almost like the frontman. That's why Grand Funk Railroad has, I think, been able to carry on without Mark Forner in the band, because Don Brewer, he's just such a big part of the sound and those songs, and got to tip your hat to what the guy does. And another one of his songs I always loved, which to me was almost had kind of a schizophrenic personality, is the song "Closer to Home." I mean, it's almost like two songs into one.
Yes, that was also a song that was getting more radio airplay for their earlier years.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a crossover from the '60s hippie kind of subject matter to the '70s rock kind of stuff. It's one of those songs that it has the subject matter in the song. Yeah. Has much more like a '60s kind of thing to it, but played more to as a rock band kind of a thing.
And it's almost like the subject matter is interesting too, because it's almost like talking about a sailor goes away to sea, and he comes home and all he has to deal with. So the subject matter itself is very interesting. And while we're on the subject of this live album, I gotta also mention, because like we said, the '70s especially were a great time period for live albums. Just to give a couple nods here, a couple honorable mentions, I would say. Obviously, Cheap Trick's live at Budokan. I got to mention that because there's a simple fact. I don't know, Gar, if you've ever heard the original studio version of "I Want You to Want Me." It's almost like a country, swampy type of song. And when they recorded it live, they turned it into a totally different sounding song. It sounds nothing like the original studio version. And interestingly enough, that's why people started going out and buying that album and
another live album that really generated was the big generator for interest in the band. Now let me tell you something. When I was in high school, remember I think in other interviews I told you about how it was popular to take your lunch money and say tell your parents
I remember that.
to buy concert tickets. Well, one of the concerts that I saved up to go see was the Kinks.
Wow.
And this was back in I'd say probably '74 or something like that, I'm guessing.
Wow.
And because in the mid '70s at that time, the Kinks were really super popular.
Talk about
so
being
I actually went
music.
to see the Kinks.
Wow.
But guess who opened for the Kinks?
Cheap Trick?
Yes.
Wow.
I knew nothing about Cheap Trick. And the bass player was famous for playing a 12-string bass, which gave him that really trippy, really cool bass sound that he used to get.
From my understanding, he invented that.
When I saw them open for the Kinks, he wasn't playing that 12-string because this is when they came out with their first album.
Oh yeah.
And which is for Cheap Trick, I love Live at Budokan, but I just really loved their first album, because even if you listen to that first album by Cheap Trick now, it's still really good.
It's such a raw,
crafted songs and everything.
Such a raw sounding album, and especially when you compare to some of the later poppier stuff, more commercial stuff they would do, especially like comparing that to something like The Flame. The Flame's a great sounding ballad, power ballad and everything, but if you were to put those two albums kind of back to back, it's like you'd almost think it was two separate bands, but that's how raw they were.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different. Some of my most favorite, albums are particular bands' first albums because usually they're hungry, they're just throwing it all out there, and they know that if it's kind of a do or die kind of a thing, because if they're afraid that if it's a failure, they're going to get dropped by the record company and everything. But if you listen to Queen's first album,
definitely.
Man, that is an absolutely great album, and that's Queen at their hungry, going for it, throwing it all out there.
Some of that early Queen stuff, if you listen to it, the predates like the harder rock stuff, almost sounds vaudeville-like.
Yes, well, there was always that air about their music that was vaudeville that kind of went through their entire career. It always had that kind of flavor to it. It was vaudeville rock.
Yeah, Queen was one of those bands. They weren't afraid to be different. They weren't afraid to go outside the box. In fact, I don't think they even had a box, if you know what I mean. They were like, well, whatever we want to do, we're going to do. And that's what made them so authentic.
But that first album by Queen, I listed that as one of those hugely influential albums, because everybody else that was doing the same thing on Facebook was listing the most popular albums.
Yeah.
But I was actually truthfully listing the albums that were hugely influential on me. And Queen's first album, you even listened to Van Halen's first album that they released back in 1978.
Yeah.
And you can tell that, oh my gosh, they are just going for it.
Yeah, well, Gar, as I'm sure, being about the same age as me, a little older, you've heard yourself over years, people write about, rock music and stuff, and they say that a band typically has like their whole life to write the first album, because these are songs that maybe you wrote about when you were coming up, things that you actually experienced early on in your life. And so it has that kind of appeal. And typically when a band they have what's called the sophomore jinx. Okay, the first album sold really great. Like Van Halen 1 sold really great, but is Van Halen 2, is it gonna live up to the hype? Is it gonna remain just as successful? And some bands are able to do it, and some bands aren't. But the first Van Halen album is a great example of that. I mean, if you notice, like the band didn't really the first three albums were really great. By the time they got the fourth one, which a lot of people like, fair warning because it's a little heavier than those first three albums, but by 1981, like we're talking about Van Halen, that's when the egos started kind of coming into the picture, and everybody wasn't necessarily on the same team, and that's when bands start to kind of fracture.
Yes. I actually was fortunate enough to see Van Halen during their Fair Warning tour.
Yeah.
And it was a mixture of the material that they did on Fair Warning, but it was also a mixture of that and their first album.
Yeah.
And I really have to admit that they're when I saw them in concert at that time, it was the first time I had really seen them in an arena type of setting. That first album stuff was just so good. Just watch them play live.
Especially,
it just came across really well. And I remember them playing Atomic Punks.
Oh yeah, especially you really got.
It was really. I was just blown over.
Yeah, I mean, especially a band like, getting back to the Kinks, and you look at what Van Halen did with You Really Got Me. I mean, the Kinks version was a great hit in its own right, but Van Halen just took it to another level. In fact, there are people out there listening to this that are saying, what were you guys talking about? Van Halen, they did You Really Got Me. No, it was Van Halen covered it. But see, a lot of people do not know that.
Well, I was around when the Kinks came out with their version too.
There you go.
So I knew that, and and for the time, because it was so many years before Van Halen covered it, the Kinks' version really rocked.
Oh yeah. It was a little more raw, but see, that's the thing, like we're talking about, and interesting enough, you're talking about the list you made on. See, I started seeing, like, over the last couple of months, more and more people making these lists, and a reason your list kind of stood out to me, like I said, the last couple of interviews we've done, is it was so diverse. I mean, that's why, like you said, somebody made me this challenge, and so I just did my the albums that really influenced. It really didn't go into an explanation, but I thought, no, I want to hear explanation now. I want to hear. Because just looking, for example, I'm not a huge Jethro Tull fan, for example, but talking to you, I found out from you, they had a major impact on you. Like, Yes, obviously had a huge impact on you, and I'm interested to have that conversation, about why these two bands really touched you, really had the impact that they did, and see, that's the thing. Interesting thing about your list, it's not the same old list that everybody else was doing. It really, you can tell these albums really did impact you.
Well, for Jethro Tull, it was by the time then I was playing music when I got exposed to them. But Jethro Tull was one of those progressive rock bands, and which where their music was very challenging. And I remember having their album Aqualung, and I remember trying to learn how to play Cross-Eyed Mary.
Wow.
and it was a really, really challenging piece of music for a young kid to be trying to learn how to play. But my thinking was, well, if I can learn how to play this,
I can play anything.
I'll be good enough to, I'll be good enough to do this, or I'll be good enough to do that. And so it was a huge challenge to me to learn how to play that particular song, because there were other songs on the record that I wasn't having as much difficulty learning how to play. But that song, I was just having a huge amount of difficulty learning how to play. And then when I finally, I got it. I understand how to position my hand to take the approach of being able to play that particular riff, and it really came down to positioning your hand, because sometimes you can be trying to learn how to do things, but it's the actual positioning of your hand and how you're going to be able to pull it off.
See, so
when I got it, I was just so excited. Oh my gosh, it was a major feat for me. And I have a feeling that the bass player for Iron Maiden might have been one of those other people that looked at that song the same way, because Iron Maiden wound up doing their version of Cross-Eyed Mary too.
Well, I have to check that out.
So, I just have a feeling, I don't have anything to put my thumb on, but I just have a feeling there has to be a reason why, they wound up doing that song, and I just really have this strong gut feeling that it has to do with their bass player having that same, if I could learn how to do this, oh my gosh, I could take whatever I'm doing to the next step. But for me, that was the big thing, for that particular album, was that particular song was such a huge challenge to me, and when I finally did it, I broke a barrier.
Wow, you made me really kind of think here, because I'll tell you, myself as a music fan, a lot, because I'm not a musician, so a lot of times I am listening to, I'm listening to the lyrics, maybe I'm listening to the music, is it catchy, is it getting my ear, whereas you just kind of made me think okay, so he's listening to this Jethro Tull music much more from a musician's point of view, which I think you're right. A lot of because it's interesting that a lot of people that are into Jethro Tull, let's think about, like you and me were briefly talking during the last interview. Tony Iommi, supposedly before Black Sabbath, was briefly a member of Jethro Tull, and he's known as Ultimate Riffmaster. And I've heard other metal guys talk about Jethro Tull. And again, I don't really consider them a metal band, but a lot of these metal guys are picking something up, I guess, from Jethro Tull, and like you said, maybe trying to figure out how to play the music and stuff. And it's interesting enough that in the early '90s, when the first time they had like a heavy metal category at the Grammys, there's that joke about Jethro Tull beating Metallica for best metal band. But again, it kind of makes you think, okay, there's something to that maybe, because all these metal guys grew up listening to Jethro Tull.
They were the guys, they were part of those bands that paved the road for these other bands coming after them. Really, Jethro Tull was one of those bands that did pave the road for other bands to follow.
Yeah, interesting.
And I'm sure they had for other musicians that followed the same type of challenge, because yes, they were a progressive rock band, and their stuff was a challenge. I think I told you in a different interview, Thick as a Brick, the entire album was one song. And very little of it repeated. And it was a huge challenge to me, because this is later on where I started becoming more advanced as a musician. But now here they come out with this, and now I'm scratching my head. How do you memorize an entire album that has very little that repeats? And so of course I took it as a challenge.
Wow, yeah.
See what I'm saying? I always looked at music, even at an extremely young age, as a challenge. And so I took it as a challenge, and I remember memorizing, and I remember pieces of Thick as a Brick that was a huge challenge to learn how to play those particular melodies, they were very challenging sections of the song to learn how to play, and to be able to put the album on and play it from beginning to end. And that's the reason why when I was really young in high school, I used to have this is more like because I moved out of my parents' house when I was 17.
Wow.
And I actually had a job, and I was renting a room from my best friend's mom, and friends would come over and hang out, and I would just put the record on, and I would play it from beginning to end, and they just hang out doing bong rips and listening to me play, kind of like a little mini concert. At my place, and I used to do that a lot. I would put I would put Bridge of Sighs on and just play it all the way, from beginning to end. And I would put Black Sabbath, and I would put Pink Floyd. I would put Animals on. I would put Dark Side of the Moon, and I would just put all these different albums on, and I would play them from beginning to end. And it was kind of unique. I wasn't thinking about it, at the time, but these people would come over to watch me play. Wow.
And getting back to Jethro Tull for a minute, interesting thing, like the discussion we just had, because if you look at guys like Ritchie Blackmore, Yngwie Malmsteen, a lot of their guitar playing. I heard stuff like even some of the early Rainbow stuff. A lot of that music is based on neoclassical type of music. A lot of that guitar playing. If you listen to it.
I think I just kind of dawned on me the kind of label that you could put onto Jethro Tull. I would call it Renaissance rock.
There you go. Yeah, very, very interesting. And let me ask you, as far as when you were coming up as a musician, we talked about all these great live albums like Grand Funk Live. We mentioned Cheap Trick, Live at Budokan, Kiss Alive one. Another one comes to mind is maybe Ted Nugent, great double gonzo. But they had all these great live albums. Like when you come up as a musician, how much thought did you, like when you first started performing out live, put into like, okay, it's important we come up with the right live set, and then when I'm up on stage, I got to think about like the choreography, how I'm going to move around. I mean, did you think back to when you're first coming up and learning how to perform live yourself? Did you ever look back at any of these great live albums, or even better yet, other bands that you saw live, and you like, I want to kind of be like that up on the stage? Or
well, I was inspired by listening to bands and their live music and stuff like that. But as a musician, learning how to play live is just like taking music lessons all over again. But instead of learning how to play an instrument, you're learning how to play live.
Yeah.
Because it's not something that all of a sudden you just get in front of an audience and everybody just like starts going nuts over your stuff, and you just hit a home run, a grand slam home run out of the park your first time. There was a lot of times that I fell completely on my face. And there was a lot of times where I think there would be a lot of people that, would have these because when you're doing it in front of people.
From an audience.
And there's a lot of people that would have that experience, that it would be too traumatic for them. And they would wind up just, forget this. No, playing live is not for me. But, there were a lot of times that I just, crashed and burned.
Wow.
But my desire
to do it,
to take that next step was so strong that I was willing to endure the embarrassment, so to speak, and kind of get back up and brush off your knees and then start getting into the fray again.
Let me ask you, like when you're upstage doing performing with Appetite for Destruction, the Guns N' Roses tribute you do, is it because I imagine it's a great art form in itself, but is it any easier like performing somebody else's material versus your own? Because like you kind of have an idea like when you're coming up with stage raps for like Welcome to the Jungle, as opposed to maybe an original tune nobody's ever heard before. They're hearing it just for the first time, I would imagine.
Well, when I was young, I would learn how to play other people's music. And after you've done that for so many years, you become really, really good at learning how to play other people's music. But the difference was that whenever I used to do that, I would use other people's music to kind of inspire, and then when I would play along with the records after I would learn how they actually did it, I would start screwing around with, well, if it was me, I would actually play it like this, and then I would play it my own way along with the record. And, but there was just so many years of playing other people's music that I just, once I reached, I think it was about 1980 when I got into my first original band. And then now I'm learning something completely different because I'm taking all of my experience from when I was in an all improvisational band, and I was applying that experience with, okay, here's an original piece of music that has no bass line. Here's how, and now come up with a bass line that actually works with it. Because if you're playing with the band and your bass lines aren't working, guess what? They're going to replace you. And your first thing when you're a bass player, because most people looked at bass players as the easiest thing to replace in a band, and the most commonly replaced in a band. So my number one objective was to make myself irreplaceable.
There you go. Yeah.
Which means that now if you're going to play bass in a band, you got to be able to bring more to the table. You have than just adding the bass lines to what everybody else is doing. And that's when I started learning how to do backup vocals and learning how to actually sing when what I'm singing has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm playing.
Yeah.
Which means you're doing two completely different things at the same time. And I remember that, and, getting used to doing these things and jumping over that hurdle.
Yeah.
And I remember, doing all of that stuff. But then when the original stuff started waning for me, and what I was doing became a dinosaur, and what became popular, which was the grunge thing, I just kind of got left in the wayside. And of course, even at that time, my daughter was born, and my focuses were more as a dad, being able to provide, for your kids what your kids need, from you as a parent.
Yeah, that's number one. Yeah.
So then, I think I alluded to this before. As a musician, I just completely got away from music back in the early 90s, the way up to about the mid 90s. My focus was in a completely different area. It was, work related, focused on, all of that, being able to provide for my kids and stuff. And, but then, my kids got old enough and I reached a point where I realized, I could actually get out and play again. What I was doing back in the 80s is not really popular right now. So I just decided I wanted to, get back into playing music, because if I'm a true to the core musician. And if I'm not playing, there's a hole in my life.
Well, there you go.
And I recognized that at that time. And so I got back into playing, and of course I got back into playing by playing covers. So then that evolved into doing a tribute band thing, because that tribute band thing seemed to be appealing, because it was a cover thing that was very similar to what I was doing in the 80s. You're not getting up and playing 4 sets or 3 sets,
touring the country or anything like
material.
that.
You're getting up and you're doing an hour to an hour and a half, or even possibly longer of somebody else's material. But that's where I reverted back to my abilities to learn how to play other people's material
and improvise, like you said.
But then you can't improvise when you're doing a tribute thing, because now virtually everything that you're doing is put under a microscope and being compared to the original that you're paying tribute to. And I remember learning that because the first tribute band that I did was a Cheap Trick tribute band.
I was going to ask you about that, because I seen you posting about that the other day.
And then all of a sudden I would get off stage, and the hardcore Cheap Trick fans would approach me, and they would say, because at that time I was singing, they would say, "Oh, Robin Zander doesn't do that.
Wow.
Robin Zander doesn't do this. Robin Zander doesn't do that." And then all of a sudden it made me realize, holy cow! Everything I'm doing is being put through a microscope, and it's being compared to the original. And that's when it made me realize that, I really had to really take a laser focus on what the original is doing, and really get down to nailing virtually everything that they were doing. All the way down to how they dressed and how they were moving and things like that, and then over the years you start becoming better and better at that. But getting forwarding all the way till now, where I'm doing the Guns N' Roses tribute, which now has become the most successful of anything tribute that I've ever done.
And let me ask you, why why do you think that is?
Now I'm becoming an actor, and that's now my focus is in that area, because that seems to be the area that needs the most work right now. And so it's a brand new challenge, and it's a fresh canvas to me. Because I don't have many years of that laser focus on learning another person's mannerism, learning how they move, their characteristics and what they're doing, and embodying that person like an actor. So it's a brand new challenge for me, just like what I was talking about Jethro Tull and learning how to play Cross-Eyed Mary. It's that same experience, but in a much different area.
Yeah, and it's funny, like when you say the song title, Cross-Eyed Mary, to me it sounds like a metal tune. You know what I mean? But it's just the title of the song makes me want to listen to it. But getting back to doing the Guns N' Roses thing, if somebody told you 15 years ago that you'd be portraying Axl Rose in a Guns N' Roses tribute, you probably would have thought they were crazy. But I will say this, interestingly enough, the reason I ask is because I don't know how big of a Guns N' Roses fan you initially were, but I tell you, from following your career as long as I have, I think you've really got Axl Rose down. I mean, you're that good. I think that's part of the reason there's not a whole truckload of Guns N' Roses tribute, because, like you said, that's a hard guy to kind of emulate. But you seem to have got it down.
Well, I'm not satisfied.
You can always get better. You can always get better, I guess. Anybody.
Yeah. In my eyes, I can see plenty of room to improve. And of course, I'm excited to go there. Really, it excites me. That's one thing. And another thing about my personal breed, me as a musician, is I love challenges. I think challenges keeps me young in mind, and keeps me excited. I just love pushing myself and trying to get better and trying to improve, and always seeing where something can be done better.
Yeah, and I think I shared this with people a few interviews ago, but I first came aware of Gar Borras in this other tribute band called Snake Pit. It was kind of a Slash tribute, and I remember going initially to check out the band. I thought it was a pretty interesting concept for a tribute band, kind of covering all things Slash. But see, I think the problem that band had, is as great of a concept as it was, is it's got to be hard for one guy to try to sound like Scott Weiland, Axl Rose, and Miles Kennedy. Because they don't really sound that much alike. So I think you kind of found your niche doing the Axl Rose thing.
Well, yes, but then again, at that time, when I was playing in that band, we wound up having a meeting, and the bass player decided to bring up the elephant in the room about deciding whether the band was going to be a Slash tribute or a Guns N' Roses tribute, because in a business sense, it just made more sense to go the route of Guns N' Roses because of the huge popularity. But at that time, I completely agreed, and that was the main reason why I became involved in that project, was because at that time, when you're searching for a band to do a tribute to, you're looking for an iconic, because the other ones that I was doing tributes to just weren't generating enough
interest
to carry the load of a headliner. And of course, everybody's goal is to be a headliner, and part of that formula of being a headliner is the actual band that you're doing a tribute to, and Guns N' Roses was that band. But at that time, I didn't sound anything like Axl. And actually, when we made that transition to being a Guns N' Roses tribute band, I was the force in getting the band bookings at the House of Blues, because I had a good relationship with Live Nation. And so I was getting the band really good gigs, and I was,
doing that,
very good at being a booking agent for the band. But I wasn't really sounding like Axl. But I knew I was at the very, very beginning, and that if I worked on it, I would be able to do it.
It's kind of your training.
It was just going to take some work, and they didn't want to wait. And I wound up getting fired from my band twice.
Wow, yeah.
Because I didn't sound like Axl. The very first version of Appetite for Destruction. And but I let them know, in a very polite way, without, it was not an ugly situation. I let them know that no, I'm not done, and I'm taking sounding like Axl as a challenge. So I had the name, I had the name secured. And so I told them that I was going to go ahead and continue on with the name, and they could go ahead and do whatever they wanted and everything like that, but I was going to continue on with the name. And then I put together another lineup that was a very good lineup, and then I wound up getting fired again.
Wow.
Because I didn't sound like Axl. But I've got a lot of spunk, and I have a lot of professionalism, because both times that I was fired, I never got ugly about it. I just told the guys that, hey, man, I'm not done, and I know what I'm capable of, and I'm going to get to where I want to be. And then by the time I put together the third lineup of Appetite for Destruction, I was starting to get a foothold on actually how to get that wheezing, how to do the Axl screams and stuff like that, to get that right sound and that right tone, and I was actually starting to be able to sound like Axl. But I do not give up easily, and
good for you.
And all of these other musicians, that told me that I didn't have it and everything.
You got it now.
They're not, they're not doing as well as I'm doing right now. So, what does that tell you as a musician?
Perseverance, right there. Right?
Never listen to the naysayers.
Yeah. So true.
Never listen to anyone that tells you that you can't do anything. Listen to your heart. Listen to your gut.
There you go.
And that's the lesson, really. If I can tell any other musician out there, don't ever listen to the naysayers. In fact, at the very beginning of Double Talk and Jive, Axl goes into a rant, and it's really about that. If I don't care, he says, I don't care if you're pumping gas or you're the king of the effing world.
Yeah.
Anybody that tells that you can't amount to SH is nothing but a double talk and jive MFer.
There you go.
In the first place.
Wow, there you go. Yeah, you got perseverance.
I guarantee you, people told Axl that he wasn't going to make it either.
Yeah. And he's surpassed all the naysayers. I mean, even the Chinese Democracy. I mean, like, that's never going to be released. Oh, it was finally released, and people responded as they did. But that's another guy they've never been able to bring down.
Well, I just cannot stress that enough. It doesn't matter what you want to do, even if it's not music, if it's something else. Don't listen to the naysayers. 9 times out of 10, the naysayers are saying what they're saying out of jealousy. Because they don't want you to succeed. Because if you do succeed, then now they're going to feel bad about themselves because they weren't able to succeed where you were able to succeed. So they don't want to be shown that.
Yeah, well, Gar Borras, my friend, I got to say this. the other band we were talking about, it's kind of like your training wheels. You're going to school, you're learning how to do it. You've really honed your craft at it. And what I love is you don't have that out of control ego. I love the fact that you're telling me today, you know what? I'm good, but I'm not great. There's still room for improvement. And as long as you got that kind of ego, you're going to go far in life.
Well, thank you, because that's a healthy ego.
Yeah.
The ego where you're looking in the mirror and you think you're all that stuff or whatever. Yeah. Nah, that ain't me. I do have an ego.
Oh yeah, a healthy one.
My ego tells me that I'm capable of doing something.
Yeah, I don't.
It's the confidence of yes, I am capable, but it's not an ego that I think I'm all that or I'm all there.
Oh yeah.
My ego is more of a fuel.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I don't think anything in life comes for free. You got to work hard at it. If it's going to mean anything to you.
Yeah, well, there's a satisfaction to hard work.
Oh yeah. Well,
there really is a satisfaction, a good feeling from really putting in, whether I'm successful or not, if I really gave it, a great shot and I really gave it my all, then I got nothing to be unhappy about because I gave it my best shot.
I'll end it this way, saying it's very much like old Blue Eyes. He did it his way, and you did it your way. So at the end of the day, that's what real success is. Not necessarily monetarily, but that's nice to have too. But if you can kind of at the end of the day say, I did it my way, and that's great.
Well, I'm not done yet, Jason.
Yeah.
I'm not done.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, Gar, as always, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. But the conversation was all kind of all over the place, but that's what makes it so much fun. You never know. Start talking about one thing and just get talking about life. But it's been so much fun. So we will do this again, my friend.